committees, and particularly the Energy Committee, which is meeting as we speak down in room 515. I'm quite proud of the fact that members of this committee are also on that committee. They seem to go hand in hand and have very similar missions. It's like incubator units becoming entrepreneurs. We're the incubator, and they're the ones trying to keep them into the retail or wholesale field. We're very fortunate this morning to have Mr. Stephen Fleming with us, and I'm sure that after the praise heaped on him Monday night by Dr. Bud Peterson and Dean Sheehan, that we will have something to look forward to. This is the Wednesday morning meeting of the House Science and Technology Committee, and we're very happy to have all of you with us. So, Mr. Fleming, if you'd like to take over.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. I don't normally start off a meeting apologizing for my lack of a Southern accent, but given the conversation we were just having before, I am a fifth-generation Georgian. My great-great-grandparents were here. My daughter makes 6 generations. I'm not a damn Yankee. I did work for a Canadian company for a long time, and they kind of beat the accent out of me. Went to Georgia Tech a long time ago, graduated from there and got into the telecommunications business. Did that for a while, got into the venture capital business through the aid of our friends at the Georgia Research Alliance, actually, with a firm that was here in the 90s and early 2000s. Invested in a number of companies throughout the Southeast, mostly in Georgia as a venture investor. Pulled 5 of those out of Georgia Tech. When we shut that firm down, I started complaining to Georgia Tech about how difficult the tech transfer process had been, and our provost at the time, Jean-Louis Chameau, who you may remember, Jean-Louis basically said, "Okay, you're so smart, you come fix that." And so I wound up on payroll at Georgia Tech. I'm not an academic. I'd never planned to work in academia. But they keep promoting me, so I guess I'll stick around for a bit. So that's me. I want to start off talking a little about the environment that we're in terms of innovation. And I hope all of you got printouts, so it's the same as on screen. This is the Kaufman report from, I guess it's 2 years ago now. I used to say last year. Kaufman report from a couple years ago on job creation. They did a very detailed study of census data and other data, and you can read faster than I can speak. But the result came as a surprise to some people, is that all net job growth in the United States comes from young companies. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean small companies. You can be a young company and still be big. Facebook's only 8 years old. But they determined for young companies being less than 5 years old accounted for all the job growth. And I won't go into the details, but that chart on the front there, or the graph on the front, the dark space is the job changes from big companies. So some years they do very well, some years they lay off a lot of people. The light blue is the jobs created by the small companies, which is pretty consistent year over year. So even in the bad years for big companies, the small companies make up job growth and job creation, which is really what's been driving the growth in the economy. And again, they went through 25 years of data. Representative Byrd, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So we just talked about the Kaufman report, and so one of the drivers of either getting this economy back on track or getting it onto a better track, depending on how you want to look at it, is innovation. And so that's really what I like to talk about. I run an organization at Georgia Tech called the Enterprise Innovation Institute, which is a long 10-syllable name that I probably wouldn't have chosen, but it does talk about what it is that we're doing. And innovation is our middle name. And innovation is one of those fuzzy words. You can hear about it from every presidential candidate. You can hear about it from every major public figure. You can hear about it from Warren Buffett. You can hear about it from anybody that wants to talk about what's going on in the economy. And they're all talking about innovation. And the problem is, if you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people together, you'll probably get about 7 definitions of the word. It's one of those words that means whatever somebody wants it to mean. So this is the definition that we've been using. I've been using this for 6, 7 years now. This is from Jeff Nicholson at 3M. He invented the Post-it note, so he's had an important role to play in modern civilization. And everybody kind of knows what research is. And Georgia Tech, we do $600 million a year of research, so we do a lot of it. And research is the transformation of money into knowledge. And that's a good way of thinking. We put in the money and we get knowledge out the other end. Innovation is the other half of the cycle. Innovation is turning knowledge into money. So when I talk innovation and when I run Enterprise Innovation Institute, unless somebody somewhere is paying for something, it's not an innovation to me. It may be an invention, it may be a discovery, there may be a Nobel Prize in it for somebody, but unless somebody has built a product or a service that's worth paying for, it doesn't count. So this is the definition that I like to use for innovation. If you read the Atlantic magazine, not Atlanta, but Atlantic magazine, they came to town a couple months ago, and just sitting at Starbucks, the editor said, here's my notebook, put it in front of me with a pen, and said, draw the innovation ecosystem of Georgia. I'd never done that before. But I started scribbling, and you can those are my scribbles on his notebook, and he wound up putting that in the magazine and on the web. So just like that, he didn't even clean it up. So, but it made me start thinking about what is this ecosystem that we've got, and what has evolved here, and what can we do to make it work better. When I started putting this presentation together, I just gathered the books off the shelf in my office that talk about innovation ecosystems. This isn't all of them. This is just the ones that I could put my hands on quickly and the ones that I don't have on Kindle because they don't photograph well. There's been a lot of books written about what makes innovation ecosystems work. There's been a lot of academic research. There's been a lot of popular culture works. There's been a lot of biographies about what works. So there's been a lot of research into this. There's not any secrets. There's not anything that really should come as any surprise. But we do know what works. So I'll ask, how many people recognize that building? Anybody? I'll give you a hint. It's a garage. That's the garage. That's the garage where Hewlett-Packard was founded, which was 1946, right after the war, and that really led to the explosion of startups around Silicon Valley. HP actually went off and bought the house to keep the garage, and now it's kind of a corporate shrine. They hold parties there occasionally, but we have seen an example of what works through what's happened with all the companies that grew out of Silicon Valley. And here's what works. And this is from all those books that I showed you and others, and you can corner as many people as you want to talk about it. But this is what works, and I'm not going to go through each of them in detail. In fact, I'm not going to go through many of them in detail. But got to have free markets. If you don't have free markets, nothing's going to work. And luckily in America we do mostly, and that's important. Capital availability I'll talk about. Intellectual property protection, you can read these. Collaborative culture, flexible career paths, welcoming to immigrants, meritocracy. In other words, basically you can go as far as you can get based on your merits, not on who you were born to or where you went to school. I don't have a chart on this, but this one's really important because only 2 countries in the world have figured this next one out. Acceptance of failure as a learning experience. When I was in the venture capital business, I didn't want to invest in a CEO who had not had a spectacular failure on his or her record, because everybody's got one in them, and if they hadn't had one already, they were going to have it with my money. So I'd rather they have had that learning experience on somebody else's nickel. And in America, you can do that. The only other country that's figured that out is Israel. And everywhere else, if you've had a failure, you are a failure as a person, as a human, as a taxpayer. I was down in Latin America a good bit because my wife's from there, and discovered that in some of the countries down there, if you have been a director of a company that has gone through bankruptcy, which I have been because I've had some investments that went through bankruptcy, you can't vote. It's like being a felon. You can never again get a loan from a bank, ever, even for a personal mortgage. You're just a non-person. So really what they're doing is they're forcing their entrepreneurs to move here or to Israel. So it's a cultural issue that's really a strength of the United States. Spent too long on that. And I'm going to talk about replenishment. So 2 of these I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation, and then I'll sit down and answer questions, or stand up and answer questions. First is availability of capital. This is one that people talk about a lot. I'm not here to push any legislation or push any particular point of view. I just want to show some of the numbers. This, and you may be able to see it better on your printout, this is the quarterly investment in venture capital startups, or venture capital, not just startups, venture capital investments in the United States by quarter since as far back as I could get the data, which was 1995. Well, there's one obvious big shape to that chart, which is the huge bubble centered around 2000, and that was the internet bubble when all trees were going to grow to the sky, and we spent an awful lot of money. We had an awful lot of fun, and then the music stopped, and then an awful lot of money went away. Matter of fact, to show some of the timing, and again, maybe easier on your printout, the far left there in 95, that first little blip was when Netscape went public. Remember Netscape? They were going to change the world. Well, they did for a while. Netscape went public. That really started heating things up. I use the Webvan IPO as one of my markers because I bought a bunch of shares at the IPO. That was not a good idea. There's the peak, March of 2000, and that was NASDAQ of 5,100 and some odd, which is twice what NASDAQ is now. After the crash, things were recovering pretty well for a while, really starting in about 03. It took a couple years to work the grief out of the system. Things were growing nicely up until 08 when Lehman Brothers had their trouble, and that caused a bit of a notch. But as you can see, things have kind of picked back up again, even since Lehman Brothers. I mean, things are back to what I'd say kind of a nice, healthy zone for venture capital. So there's plenty of venture capital in the country, plenty of money going into the sector, plenty of good investors out making the deals. What may be hard to see on there is you've got the big bump of the blue lines, then you got kind of a smaller bump of green, and you got a real tiny flicker of gold down there at the bottom, which we're going to talk about. Venture capital is incredibly regionalized. So if you look at the pie chart, half the venture capital in the country is invested in California. It just is. That just is a fact of our world. So actually, a little more than half is between Northern and Southern California, and of the rest, a little more than half of that is New York, New England. So everybody else, the other 45, 46 states, are competing for about 20-25% of the venture capital investment. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So the good news is the Southeast is actually the biggest of the little guys. So if you look at our notch there, we're actually bigger than Texas, we're bigger than the Midwest, we're bigger than the Northwest. We do okay. We're not in California territory, and we'll talk a little more about that. But what I'm going to do, this is the same chart, but I'm just going to do a magnifying glass on it. I'm going to expand the vertical axis by 10 times. So basically, the California numbers are now up on the roof someplace. You can't see those anymore. And now I've expanded the green and the yellow, so multiplied by 10. And you can see the shape of the curve stays pretty much the same. Went through a crazy bubble, had some ups and downs, and now it's at a pretty steady state, both for the green and for the yellow. The green is the Southeast, which is the 7 or 8 southeastern states. And really the Southeast breaks down to Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and a bunch of others. But those three dominate it. And you can see after the bubble, it's been very consistent quarter by quarter by quarter. The Southeast as a total gets about 5% of the national venture capital investment. And Georgia gets about a third of that. And again, it's split about a third, us, North Carolina, and Florida. So a third of 5% is 1.5%. Again, I'm glass half full kind of a guy. There's a lot of money being invested in the Southeast, a lot of money being invested in Georgia. But nationally, we're about 3% of the population and about 1.5% of the venture capital. So on a per capita basis, we're about half where we ought to be, just to be average. So, we can do better than that. We can do better than that. In terms of sectors, I'll talk about this stuff till you tell me to shut up. But in terms of sectors, again, we kind of split out. This is the Southeast again, not just Georgia. In the Southeast, we split up about a third. This is over, what is my data here? I can't read this. 2008 to 2011, so 3 years worth of data. About a third into information technology, which is not just internet, but that's in there. About a third into healthcare, which is not just biotech, that includes healthcare services, and a third into everything else. And it's interesting that people talk a lot about green investment and our committee meeting across the hall, the energy investment sector, biofuels and things like that. You actually see it's still a pretty tiny sliver of the venture capital investment. So it gets a lot of attention, but it hasn't really attracted a lot of the dollars yet. I ran the numbers a different way. These are now we're just doing Georgia. And this is just the first 3 quarters of 2011 because that's the deals I had handy on my hard disk. This thing called a power law, and what you see is we had 78 venture transactions in Atlanta last year. I don't have the fourth quarter numbers yet. But the top 10% of those deals took almost 2/3 of the dollars. So you see this concentration of the money into a small handful of deals. For example, Suniva, which we're going to talk about, that's a Georgia Tech spinout. Suniva alone consumed almost $100 million out of that, $362 million, almost over a quarter of that went to one company. There's a couple others under that, Cardlytics, Celanova, that each had, tens of millions of dollars in venture capital. And then I don't have a laser pointer, but that long tail of the little tiny blue dots and the red rectangle there, that's all the other deals. That's okay. That's actually how a healthy investment ecosystem works. What's important to notice is those in the long tail are the ones that find it really hard to get capital from someplace else. The big ones, Suniva can get capital from Dubai if it needs to. Suniva will attract capital from all over the planet. But the little guys who need $250,000, $500,000, maybe $50,000, they're not going to get somebody from out of region to come and invest in them. So it's that early stage money that's so critically important to Georgia that we just don't have enough of. And so I think that is showing the dynamics of there's venture capital, but you subdivide venture capital, you've got different kinds of deals inside the venture capital ecosystem. And some of those we do well at, some of those we don't. So so what? So what does this mean for Georgia? Some of you have seen the button that I'm wearing that says No Valley. I have others. If you'd like one, I'll hand you one after. I carry a pocket full of them. This doesn't mean I don't like Silicon Valley. I do. I've got lots of friends there. I've made lots of money there. I still have investments there. It means that we're not Silicon Valley. We're different. And that's not good nor bad. That's just a fact. And we don't have half the venture capital on the planet headquartered in our neighborhood. And we need to figure out how to make the most of what we have and the most of what we could have with maybe a little bit of incremental work, but without pretending and without fooling ourselves. And that's what's really important to me, is that we be honest about we have assets that are incredibly strong. We have resources from people to brain power to research to other things, quality of life, Hartsfield Airport, all the economic development aspects that are actually quite good. But we can't pretend that we're suddenly going to be Silicon Valley, or, I hate to say it, we're not going to be the next Silicon Valley. The next Silicon Valley is going to be in Silicon Valley. They're a self-sustaining reaction. They have all the critical mass they need. We can do better than we are, but we're not them. And I want to be clear about that. Here's an example. Here's the 12 most active venture capital firms in the U.S. You'll notice that none of them are in Georgia. None of them are close to Georgia. 10 of them are in California, 2 are in the Northeast, 1 New York, 1 Connecticut. So that's the reality of the market. It is difficult, though not impossible, to get those firms to invest here. But it is certainly a hurdle that our companies have to jump, which is tougher for them than somebody who's an hour's driving distance from their office. We've been pretty good at it. Again, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, so when I look at this chart, please, I'd rather answer questions than do charts. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In most cases, when someone is preparing to ask a venture capitalist to invest in their project, there's a business plan that has been put in place. Now, who helps them prepare that business plan that they're ultimately going to send to these venture capitalists?
Okay. In general,
tell me somewhat of the process. If someone here is in Georgia looking to find someone who has the capital they can put into their business, who helps them prepare that business plan to submit it to them?
We, Georgia Tech, for the last 32 or 33 years, has been running an organization called ATDC, the Advanced Technology Development Center. We're in our third home. It's part of my organization at Georgia Tech, but it's funded by y'all in the legislature to serve the state of Georgia. So it's located at Georgia Tech for administrative convenience, but it is a function for the state of Georgia. And what we do is we do have companies that come in with all sorts of questions, including how do I put a business plan together to raise venture capital. There's other sorts of questions we work with as well. And we do 2 tiers of assistance. We used to say we're only going to pick the best deals and we're only going to help the best companies. And that was how we worked for 29 or 30 of those years. And ATDC's had some great successes. We've had 135 graduates so far, about to graduate another 8. They account for 4,500 jobs in Georgia. I mean, it's been successful. But when I took it over 2.5 years ago, I said, look, when I was in the venture capital business, had a checkbook, I wasn't smart enough to pick just the good deals. So why is it that we, sitting here in our little office, can only pick the good deals? We should try to help everybody.
Right.
So we opened the doors 2.5 years ago, and our membership went from 40 companies to 450. So we now have 450 startups that are members of ATDC. My staff did not go up by a proportionate ratio, as you might expect. So we have had to learn how to scale and how to help 450 companies rather than 40 companies. So we have a couple of different tiers. Some of it is classroom teaching. Some of it is doing examples that others can learn from. Some of it is bringing in mentors from the community, and we now have a list of, I think, it's almost 50 mentors that we have who are experienced entrepreneurs or experienced executives who help. We have templates they can use. We have lists of people to put them in contact with. We make a lot of introductions. We buy a lot of coffee at Starbucks. Actually, they buy their own coffee, but we do a lot of meetings at Starbucks. We do a lot of things to help introduce them. There is a core of those companies that gets extra attention, and those are the ones we think really do have the highest potential. And so, for example, when we go to the West Coast, we say, okay, these are the ones we want to walk in the door with, because these are the ones we think are going to be a great fit for previous page, some of those firms on the previous page. So it's about 400-odd companies in total, and it's about 40-odd companies that we really do the high-touch lots of work with. But I think even the other 400 that don't get that get some benefit. They keep paying their dues, so they must think that it's worth. And they keep coming to our events because our rooms are too small. They keep coming to our events, and we do help. But that is the technology coaching, technology company coaching service for Georgia. We do only work with technology startups, but we do a lot of them. Please, question or?
I just wondered if you saw a trend in one area or another, i.e., energy, health, etc.
We're seeing more energy, so on a percentage basis, we're seeing big growth in energy, but it's from a base of nothing. So we still don't have a whole lot of companies, but we've got, I'd have to look at the list, we've probably got 8 or 10 energy startups of various sorts, and that's from energy monitoring. We have better battery technology. We have solar cells, obviously. We do lots of solar work. We got a windmill company. We've got, it's not energy, but it's kind of clean tech. We've got one that monitors water flow in your home, sensor systems. So there's probably 10, maybe 12 in energy. And that's from zero a few years ago. We see an enormous number of software companies. And that's because software companies are cheap to start. I mean, you got a laptop, you got an account with Amazon, you can have a software company. So we're seeing companies start there with, essentially no capital, just out of the founders' pockets. So we see those. We do a lot of semiconductor work. Those are a lot of the companies that do get harvested and moved to Silicon Valley. We have an incredibly strong semiconductor and wireless group at Georgia Tech. A little fact I like to throw around. If you look at wireless devices, be it your iPad, your iPhone, any cell phone, your laptop with a Wi-Fi connector, or the routers, all of that technology, 10% of the engineers in the world that work on that come out of Georgia Tech. 10% of the published papers in the world in RF and mixed signal wireless come out of Georgia Tech. So it's very, very strong. What we haven't done is create the local ecosystem to keep them here and create companies, because those are expensive. Unlike a software company that I can start for $5,000 in a Visa card, you need $500,000 to play and $20 million to be successful, and we haven't built those here. I didn't finish. We are doing an awful lot. Actually, Georgia is doing an awful lot in biomedical devices, materials, diagnostics, those sorts of things. Emory does a lot, of course, in pharmaceuticals. Georgia Tech doesn't do very much in that. But we have the joint department with Emory, which does lots of the devices and materials, and those have been very visible, those are tough to make an investment case for because of the timing. We just saw Inhibitex here got purchased by, help me out, who bought Inhibitex? Was it Glaxo or? Well, local biotech company got bought by Glaxo or Pfizer, one of the big guys. I don't really remember, for $2.5 billion, which great. It was founded 17 years ago. So the initial investors were long gone, and they had gone public, and those folks had all sold, and then another set of investors had come in, and it's like if you ever looked at the history of FedEx, they went through 7 rounds of financing, and only the 7th round investors made any money, and the first 6 were all washed out because it took so long. Biotech has some of those characteristics, so there needs to be an investment process with kind of a longer holding period for biotech. Other questions? I'd much rather answer questions than go through charts, but I will go through charts. This one is showing that we get 92 cents of every venture dollar in Georgia from out of state, and again, I'm half full kind of a guy. So to me, it's showing, wow, our deals are so good that we're convincing people from out of state to come put their money into Georgia, so that 92 cents out of every dollar we're harvesting from someplace else. Yeah.
Question: how long does it take from the time we pass legislation that approves something until you might see results? For instance, last year, I believe it was the fireman's
fireman's pension.
Yeah, that we allowed to invest some of its money, and it looks like this year we will add.
Hope there's real wood.
Yeah, ERS in that one.
Right.
So how long does it take before you can see this money actually get involved in the situation?
It's longer than you'd like. The pension dollars, there's a couple of issues there. One is the pension funds, and I do hope we pass the legislation this year. I've been hoping for that for a long time. The pension dollars have to be invested in something that's fiduciarily responsible for the pensioners. So not all of that alternative asset investment that we hope they're going to be authorized to do, not all of that will go to venture capital. Of that, not all of that will go to venture capital firms in Georgia. And of that, not all of that will get invested in companies in Georgia. So you're looking at a percent of a percent of a percent. So the actual dollars that are going to flow from that into Georgia-based startups, I think will be surprisingly small. So that's an issue. And there's other mechanisms to put more money into Georgia-based startups, and I'm not here to push legislation, but there are bills to do that. The other issue is timing. Is from the day a dollar hits a venture fund to the day a dollar comes back out of that venture fund to be recycled into the financial community. If you're really lucky, and you're usually not that lucky, it's 5 years. On average, it's 10, and sometimes it's 15. So that's kind of the bell-shaped curve to start thinking about. Is a dollar invested now, we'll see payback 5 2-year terms from now, and that's a challenge. Now, but it's just like drilling in Anwar. 10 years ago, they said if we drill right now, we won't see any oil for 10 years. Guess what? If we drilled in Anwar 10 years ago, we'd have oil right now. Same thing with this. We have to start now, because if we wait 2 more years or 2 more years or 2 more years, it just pushes that out further. Does that help? Follow up?
Next question. Is I've been reading a number of economic documents that say, in effect, things like the price of oil has remained stable, but yet the dollar has gone down into the tank. And the latest article I read showed that if 50 years ago you bought oil using ounces of gold, today it would be the same price. Both oil and gold, of course, has gone up. And so my question is, with the dollar is down as far as it is, how difficult is it to get, say, out of country money to come in and be part of venture capital in the U.S.?
Well, it's you're getting in monetary policy is way outside of my area of expertise. But my daddy used to say that when he was a kid, a silver dime would buy you a meal, a $20 gold piece would buy you a suit of clothes, and 20 of those would buy you a car. and they still will. And he's right, or he was right. He's passed away. So yeah, I mean, we do have monetary issues. There are a lot of what's called sovereign wealth funds elsewhere. A lot of them come out of the Middle East, some out of Europe, some out of Asia, that have invested in venture capital firms in the United States. Here's the issue, because I used to play in that end of the world, trying to raise money from limited partners. They have such large amounts of money that they really want to invest in firms that can accept a large amount of money. So in other words, $100 million investment. And nobody wants to be the only investor in a fund, so if you have a $100 million fund, your biggest investor is going to be $20 million. Nobody wants to be more than 20, maybe 25% of your fund. So if you've got sovereign wealth firms that are trying to put hundreds of millions of dollars to work, you by definition are looking at $500 million plus venture capital firms, of which there are precisely none outside of Northeast and California. There certainly are none in Georgia, and I don't see any chance of there being one anytime soon. I was hoping for a while there would be a level kind of fund of funds of those that would then spread out to the other 40-odd states, but that hadn't happened yet. So they are investing from overseas. They do see the value of investing in American innovation, American ingenuity, but they're investing in funds in California and in the Northeast. They're not investing here. Here are the funds in Georgia, by the way. It's not a very long list. There's only 10 of them. And then if you subdivide that to the ones that will actually write a check to an early stage company, there's really only 5. And then you start looking into and realizing how specialized some of these are. For example, Fulcrum is only going to do business-to-business software deals because that's where all their partners came from. So if you've got one of those, great. You've got a really good candidate with Fulcrum. But if you have a clean tech deal, they're not going to talk to you. TTV gets a lot of their money out of Columbus from Synovus and TSYS, so they do financial transaction companies. They're really good at it. They're very successful. But that's a very narrow niche. They're sticking to what they know. If you have something that's not a financial transaction technology company, they're not going to waste your time nor theirs by talking to them. So it becomes a pretty short list pretty quickly. So there's not a locally domiciled. There's not a lot of locally domiciled venture capital. That's one of the things that came out of the Governor's Competitive Initiative report, which all of you have been part of, and then obviously out of the SR68 report, which appreciate your co-chairing that, which you all know. I assume you've all read the results of that report, and you know all this, the 7 hearings and all around Georgia, and got 700 ideas and came down to about 200 recommendations, some of which are centered around the topics we've just been discussing. But I think that the result of both of those reports, the Competitiveness Initiative and SR68, were reminding us we're not Silicon Valley, and we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking we are. We should try to focus on things that are within our grasp. I'm taking more time than I meant, but I really would like to answer more questions. But I do want to talk briefly back to our what works chart. This is a repeat. I talked a lot about availability of capital. Up the second bullet there. I want to talk a little about the bottom one. What has worked in the Valley, what has worked in Israel, what has worked in other places is this continuous replenishment. You're not always going back to the well with the same people for the same ideas. You're getting fresh people, usually younger people, who've got new ideas, new technologies, and honestly, they're too naive to know how hard this is going to be, because if they knew how hard it was going to be, they'd just go get a job. So we are exploiting the ignorance of our young folks in these startups, but that's okay, because when it works, it's wonderful. I want to talk a little about Georgia Tech. I think a lot of you know this, but I just like bragging about it because, we've been ranked for the 6th year on the U.S. News and World Report as the number 4 engineering school in the country. And when the ones in front of you are MIT, Stanford, and Cal Berkeley, number 4 is not bad. Given the problems in the University of California system, I think some of us have ambitions of knocking them off the number 3 slot pretty soon. So it is not just the engineering school down the street. It's not just the state college that teaches engineering. It truly is a national resource that we've established at Georgia Tech over the last 125 years. One of the neat things I love to brag about, we're good at everything that we do. U.S. News ranks 12 kinds of engineering. We don't do one of them. It's agricultural. That's done by our friends in Athens. In the other 11, we're top 10. So all 11 that we target, we're top 10 in all of them. So it's not just that we're strong in electronics or just that we're strong in biotech. We're strong across the board. I want to take a little more time to talk about why are we here? In other words, why is Georgia Tech here? Why do universities exist? And this I went to Georgia Tech, and I minored in history of all things, which is hard to do at Georgia Tech. But I like our friend Speaker Gingrich, I like to pretend that I'm an amateur historian, and so we've looked some into history of universities and what they're here for. And 1,000 years ago, universities had big walls around them. That's Oxford, but it could be the Sorbonne, it could be Milan, it could be the universities that were in China at about the same time. They had big heavy walls, and they were safe places because the world is a dangerous place. And 1,000 years ago, if somebody knew something and that person got knocked on the head, like Archimedes did by a Roman soldier, everything that he had invented died for 1,000 years. So universities were storehouses. They were safe places to keep knowledge and pass it on to the next generation. And that worked for about 800 years. They still are. That role hasn't gone away in the background. But we added a role about 200 years ago with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution of being a knowledge factory. So not just a storehouse, but to create new knowledge. And you'd pour resources in one end, which is money, facilities, smart young people, smart old people, academic freedom, tenure, pour all those resources into one end. And over a period of time, knowledge would pop out the other. And so you had a factory to create knowledge. And that was new. That really didn't exist more than 200 years ago. The idea before then was all knowledge was written in a book someplace, and all you were doing was making changes on it. The idea of creating new knowledge in a knowledge factory really was about 200 years ago with some of the universities in England and in Scotland. Just as a little history, 125 years ago, this was us. You recognize the building on the right. That's the Tech Tower. No neon yet. And I love showing this picture because this is when Georgia Tech was founded. We had two buildings. And the one on the right, which is now our administration building, was the classroom building and the library. And the one on the left, anybody know? I've given this presentation sometimes. Some of you may have seen this before. Anybody know what the building on the left was? Wasn't a dorm. Wasn't a gym. Wasn't research. Pardon? No, although it double duty as that. It was a machine shop. So Georgia Tech students would spend the morning over in the classroom building wearing suits and ties. At lunch, they would go change into overalls and then go to the machine shop in the afternoon and work on equipment. So we have had this very practical thread of building engineers who get their fingernails dirty since we were founded. Now, the kind of engineering has changed. I mean, that was originally textiles and mechanical, and now it's, biotech and nanotech and software. But we have embedded deep in our DNA that we build engineers who do things. We're not an ivory tower, we're a brick tower. We were not established by a church, not established for academic ethereal pursuits. We were established to build engineers, to go build factories and build railroads. And we still kept a lot of that, even though the world's a lot different than it was in 1885. I think that still is kind of baked into our DNA. So we have been a knowledge factory, and we're a good one. And again, we're doing $600 million a year of research, and we'll continue to. But something we're seeing is there's really a third stage coming for research universities, which is new, which is a knowledge hub. And really understanding that we're not going to create all the knowledge, but we can connect all the knowledge. And the line that I use in Atlanta is, Coke's not going to talk to Pepsi, but they both have relationships with Georgia Tech. So we can actually sit in between those relationships and communicate between companies, between federal agencies, between big companies and little companies, between entrepreneurs and finance sources. And you can read this faster than I can talk. That we have where we can act not just a place where the knowledge is created, but a place where the knowledge gets connected to other places. And that's how an ecosystem gets healthy, is having all these. We have a lot of programs that do this. I will speak about these until restrained, but I will try to restrain myself. We do a lot of things. We know how to walk and chew gum at the same time. There's a lot of logos here. I'm not going to go through them all in detail. I'm going to pick about 3 of them. But the message of this is there are a lot of different ways in which we're supporting this entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's people who are spending their careers in little corners of it, and there's people who are spending their careers trying to connect different parts, which is what I find myself doing. But and actually, if you look in the top right corner there, it's not just startups. Open Innovation is a book that came out by Henry Cheeseborough, 10 years ago, which is how large companies can use these same principles in innovation. And the idea, which Cheeseborough popularized, is that no matter who you are, if you're AT&T, if you're Procter & Gamble, Monsanto, most of the smart people in the world don't work for you. and there needs to be a way to incorporate other ideas from other places into your large corporation, just like startups need to be able to do ideas. I've talked about the amount of research we do, $600 million. It's a lot, about a third in engineering, a third DoD, a third everything else. I'm not going to go through all the words, but Venture Lab is a program we put together 10 years ago. It's was the first in the country. It's been widely imitated. I don't think it's been matched anywhere. But it's kind of neat when MIT and Stanford are looking to Georgia Tech for ideas of how to help startups. I kind of like that. This is what I used to run until I got promoted. And Venture Lab is about pulling technologies out of the laboratories at Georgia Tech and turning them into companies. So again, relevant to your question, who helps them? If they're based on Georgia Tech intellectual property, oh boy, we're all over them. You know, we basically act as a co-founder of the company, getting them up to speed, finding money, finding management, because the professors can't be management, they're terrible at it. Finding resources, it's teaching cats how to swim. I mean, you know, they can do it, but you're going to lose a lot of blood and the cat's going to hate you. So we don't let professors be CEOs. So Venture Lab is all about getting stuff out of the labs at Georgia Tech, and we average about we've talked a little about ATDC. This is the one that I was answering earlier. It's one of the top 10 incubators in the world, according to Forbes magazine, so I trust Forbes. I like that. It's been around for a while. And those are the three things that we do. We do the coaching, we build the connections, and probably most importantly and hardest to understand is we build a community, is we get these small company CEOs helping each other. And that turns out to be really magic, because I can tell them till they're blue in the face, till I'm blue in the face, but if they're sitting with somebody who was exactly where they are now a year ago, and they say, oh yeah, I went through that, and here's how I got through it, and here's the right number to call, and so forth, that helps a lot. Question?
I'm actually going off of a model of someone that's coming in and offering a idea that you're wanting to develop. But ultimately, it's going to require other businesses to support that one. It's no business today stands alone.
Right.
Do you have those that you say, well, there's a venture capitalist out there that they like your idea, but it's going to require some other technology that is going to need to supply to make your project successful? Okay. Do you have those situations where
all the time? It's especially prevalent in the biotech area, where really no company stands alone. And as a matter of fact, the goal for a biotech company is really not to go public and to be worth $1 gazillion. The goal is to prove their technology to the point where a larger company, be it GlaxoSmithKline or be it Johnson & Johnson or be it Medtronic, to where they say, yep, that will plug into our existing web of intellectual property and our existing panoply of products that we have on the market, and you're going to fit right there, and we're going to plug you into that, and we're going to buy you. And they can buy them for a lot of money. I mean, hundreds of millions or sometimes billions of dollars. But yeah, it's very, very difficult in biotech for any company to make it through to an IPO standing alone. The other extreme is probably software. I mean, software companies can be, you know, nobody had to plug into Facebook for Facebook to work. Right. And then other companies are kind of in between. Semiconductors are kind of in between. Materials probably more like biotech. You get it to a certain point, you get to a proof of concept or a pilot plant production. And then at that point, you know, if it's biofuels, you get to, you know, thousands of liters a day, and at that point, Chevron buys you and makes millions of liters a day. So, you know, there's different ways, but it is important in the early stages of these companies to insulate them as much as you can, because they've got to find whatever their little diamond is and polish that up to the point where the partner gets interested. And if you get them involved too early, basically what will happen is you'll have a premature sale. So instead of getting the point where the big company buys you for $100 million, the company buys you for $3 million and hires everybody, and then you're working for a paycheck, which in most cases is not what those entrepreneurs wanted to do. Right. It's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, but it wasn't what they were looking for. But that actually is a good lead into Flashpoint. Flashpoint's new. A lot of you probably haven't read about it yet. We started our first class August. We're starting our second class in June of this year. And Flashpoint is all about taking we use the word cohort for some bizarre reason, but a class of entrepreneurs who don't have a fully baked idea yet, who don't fully understand what their market is, don't fully understand what their partnership positions are going to be, don't understand what their capital requirements are going to be. And we run them through a semester, so 16 weeks, of intensive coaching, of intensive training, of intensive exercises, where at the end of that they come out and they have polished their plan to the point where it is fundable. And we did our first cohort in August, did our demos in January. So we had 15 of them survived the process. So the 15 surviving companies, which is pretty good actually, 15 surviving companies, we did demo days here in New York City at one of the best venture capital firms in New York, and one in Palo Alto at arguably the best current venture capital firm in early stage companies in California. And in both because here everybody loved them, great, hometown team. I expected that. What I hoped for but didn't expect was in New York and in Palo Alto. People came to us and said, we see a lot of pitches, we see a lot of demo days. This was the best group we've ever seen. Coming out of Atlanta, going into the big guys, and our deals were that good. So the 15 companies that we created, 3 of them have already been funded, 3 more are talking term sheets, probably 3 more will get funded. So it's this process works. It was very complicated to make this legal in the state of Georgia. I wish it had not been quite so difficult because we could have started it a year earlier, but we got there. And so we now have a process that we think this could be replicated anywhere, and we want some credit for that. We're gonna be done by 9.
Okay. No, I've got.
He's almost as inquisitive.
Believe me, that means you're awake.
It's,
I like that.
It's interesting. We talk about these venture capitalists and working with some individuals that's trying to bring a deal to our community where I represent. A lot of international investors. How many international investors or capital investors are there operating in the U.S. Right now?
I don't know a number. I know it's dozens. I would seriously doubt that it's hundreds.
Really?
So I suspect it's in the dozens. Yeah. There's several good-sized venture funds in California, and there's at least a couple in Boston that are primarily tasked or primarily funded from overseas and primarily tasked with finding U.S. homes for that international capital. But I'd guess it's in the dozens. I'd have to look it up.
I'm kind of surprised. Yeah, there's not more.
It's actually complicated to find the right people to run a fund like that, and there's not many of them. So it will probably continue to grow until we get our own house in order.
Thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate all that you do. Certainly in participating in these study committees in the last few years that I've been around.
We've enjoyed it. We're going to keep doing it.
Good. In 2007 or thereabouts, I remember that there was an enormous amount of venture capital money that was around. And, of course, through our study committee from the bio side, many people said that until Georgia became a public-private partnership, it was going to be very difficult for us to bring more venture capital money into Georgia. Of course, now with the economic challenges that we have, and there's so many people that are anti the government, the state, using our taxpayer dollars. How do we go about beginning a partnership now? And I know certainly with legislation that will help from the pension fund if it were to pass, because I know it's been tried for many years now.
It's been tried for a while.
Exactly.
The pension fund money will help. I promised the dean I wasn't, and he's not looking, so I can talk now. I promised the dean I wasn't going to push legislation here at the podium. I would strongly encourage everyone to take a good look at House Bill 718. 718 is the one to sell insurance tax credits and use those to invest in funds that would then invest in venture capital firms. It's modeled on some very successful programs in neighboring states, South Carolina and Tennessee. We live in a competitive environment. There are other states that have figured this out that are not California and Massachusetts, because they don't need this. I mean, they're fine. It's the other 40-odd states that actually have a chance at it. Some of them have been very attentive to the needs of the venture investment community. Some of them have put programs in place that make themselves much more attractive to the venture investment community. And the folks who wrote House Bill 718 very liberally stole from their ideas. So that's not a bad strategy. With that, and unless Dean lets me loose, I'm going to shut up about it. But there are things the state could do, which could help.
Thank you.
Okay.
In our ball game, you got about 2 minutes.
And I've got 2 charts, so that'll work. I do want to brag about Suniva a little bit. Suniva is one of our spin-outs that came out of Georgia Tech. It's kind of a poster child because it was 30 years of federal research at Georgia Tech. Venture Lab extracted a company. We found venture capital. We found a CEO. Actually got a CEO out of the software business. Didn't know a darn thing about solar cells. Ran him through ATDC. Got him a bunch of money. My operation helped him with manufacturing process improvement. Gwinnett Tech got involved to do workforce training. They're running 3 shifts up in Norcross right now. Got a couple hundred employees and $1 billion backlog. So it's a fabulous success story. I want more of them. We got folks all over Georgia. A lot of people don't realize Georgia Tech has offices all over the state, including folks who work out of their houses. We've got about 25 locations, hopefully one in each of your backyards. If not, come talk to me. But we do reach out into the communities that we live in and think that's important. Just want to finish up. For those of you who haven't been to Technology Square lately, this is a picture of it next to the highway there at the interstate and 5th Street, the downtown connector. We do as much remotely as we can, but physical proximity is really important. And the fact that we've pulled so many resources together. These are just the Georgia Tech programs that are located at Technology Square. I can't go through all of them, but there's a lot of research, a lot of commercialization activity. These are third parties. This is Georgia Economic Development. This is Georgia Power's innovation program. This is Technology Association of Georgia. You can read the list. All right there. We all eat at the same restaurants. We shop at the same bookstore. And most importantly, we go to the same Starbucks. We're all in Starbucks range of each other, and we talk to each other a lot. And I have other people coming through saying, how do you make this work in my state? And we're going to get a piece of land 20 miles from town and build a new park out there. And I'm going, no, you're not. Or you may, but you'll waste your money. Kannapolis, North Carolina, spent $1 billion. Nobody's there. Being in the middle of the city and within what I call Starbucks range of each other turns out to be really important because of the sparks that fly from different folks. There's my contact information. I'll answer questions until you tell me to sit down, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
Happy to do
questions? Other than Paul, of course.
No, I just said that the reason why they confused whether or not you're from the north, you've answered the question.
I talk fast.
You drink a lot of caffeine.
We just had a delegation in from Beijing last Monday, and I felt terrible because it was one of those where I speak and then they have a translator, and I speak and they have a translator. And the poor girl's eyes just kept getting bigger, and I finally, okay, I'll slow down. I'm sorry. I'm just talking too fast. So I do try to squeeze a lot in. Other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Meeting
Thanks.
adjourned.
Thanks.